Hello, everybody, and welcome to this live webcast, a guide to change management in law firms. It's co-sponsored by LexisNexis Practice Management and the North Carolina Bar Association. Thanks for taking the time to be with us this afternoon. My name is Bob Ambrogi. I'm going to moderate the discussion this afternoon, and I have two other panelists here with me live in the room, and one more who's on the phone. Unfortunately, work obligations kept him from being with us this afternoon. So before we get started with our discussion, the first thing I want to do is to just introduce who is here with me today. Let me just start with Jason Anderman, and I'm going to ask each of the panelists to just give you a quick introduction about themselves. So Jason, let's hear from you.
Sure. I am the founder of WitchDraft, the online document assembly platform for automatically creating legal documents with a simple Q&A template. And I also consult with law firms and corporate legal departments on speeding up contract negotiations and making alternative fee agreements profitable. Thank you very much.
And next, I'd like to introduce Chris Anderson. Chris?
Good afternoon, and thank you for everybody for being on the phone call. My name is Christopher Anderson. I am the product manager for a product at LexisNexis called Firm Manager, which is a web-based case and matter management software application for solo lawyers and small law firms. I am an attorney. Prior to being with LexisNexis, I managed a law firm in Georgia. I've been a prosecutor, and now am bringing this technology to solos and small firms.
Thank you very much, Chris. And last but not least, Kenya Odor.
Thank you, Bob. My name is Kenya Odor, and I have a doctorate in human factors or ergonomics. I'm currently the manager of the user experience and technical writing teams within the LexisNexis Practice Management organization. I have over 13 years of experience within the field. And to tell you a little bit, or to summarize what human factors is, I basically have learned or been practically trained in understanding how people think and how they work, and apply that to system design, processes, tasks, that sort of thing.
Thank you, Kenya. Well, somebody once said about the legal profession, there are two kinds of lawyers, those who dislike change and those who absolutely hate it. We prefer the words of John F. Kennedy here. Change is the law of life, and those who look only to the past or present are certain to miss the future. The fact is that change is happening around us as lawyers at a rapid pace. The ABA Commission on Ethics 2020 just spent 3 years examining this question, and recently reported to the American Bar Association annual meeting that technology, this is a quote from their report, technology has irrevocably changed and continues to alter the practice of law in fundamental ways. Those are kind of strong words from the ABA, and it's not just technology. It's the economy. It's more than anything, perhaps, the demands of our clients are expecting us. They're expecting lawyers to practice differently, to practice smarter, if that's a word. Resistance may not be futile, but it is suicidal. If firms don't learn to adapt and change and to manage change effectively, they're going to fail. They're not going to thrive in the midst of all this. So we're going to talk more about this today. We're going to explore how firms manage change. I did want to note that there is a capacity to ask questions. I guess there's a button you can press, and it will send an email to us. If you have a question, go ahead and shoot it to us. We are going to hold off until about 15 minutes before the end of the program to take up the questions. And if we don't get a chance to get to all of your questions in the time that we have, we will actually forward the questions to the panelists, and we'll try our best to answer them directly to you after the program is over. So please take advantage of that opportunity. The first question we really want to address is just why is change so hard? Why do we find it so difficult to go through it? And what are some of the key barriers? And Kenya, I'm going to throw that question to you.
Sure. So I wanted to start off by talking about a psychological principle called self-efficacy. And self-efficacy looks at a person's beliefs about their ability to succeed in a particular situation. So these beliefs will determine how a person thinks, what they feel, and how they behave in that particular situation. So we can define a goal, we can set those goals around what we need to change and the things that we need to achieve, but putting that plan into action is a bit more difficult. And this occurrence of self-efficacy is what plays a major role in our abilities to succeed or not. So 4 key barriers to change. Look at how you take the information that you're thinking about and what you feel and how you actually respond to that information. So barriers to change can involve you not even trying. So in situations where you have an opportunity to master a particular activity, if you don't take advantage of those opportunities, then you don't know if you're capable of succeeding. And so not trying can be a barrier. Also ignoring other successes. So if you haven't had an opportunity to hear others' examples of what they've learned or what they've done, if you don't stay current with what's going on within your field, then it's difficult to hear about the challenges that others may face that may be similar to yours, and from that you can learn how to overcome some of these challenges and change. Resisting others' encouragement. So you have to allow others or have opportunities for others to be your cheerleader. So you need to have individuals around you that can provide that verbal encouragement so that you can succeed around making a change. And finally, a lot of what we think can determine what we can actually accomplish. So negative thinking or thoughts of defeat even before trying can make it difficult to change.
Thanks a lot. Chris, I want to see if you had any follow-up thoughts on that before we go on to the next question.
No, I think that those certainly strike a chord. From practicing law, having a firm with some partners around to give that positive encouragement, or for solos, being a member of a bar organization or participating in some sort of activity where both you can be aware of other successes or have people encouraging your own is key. The practice of law can be a lonely business, as I'm sure you know very well, and having that around can really make the difference between being able to embrace change and not. So.
Yeah, thanks. Good thoughts. Jason, anything else on that?
It makes me think a lot about the nature of a decent-sized law firm, where essentially, because of the fact that an equity partner can pick up and still own the client relationship and go to another firm, there really isn't a lot of unity in terms of execution across the entire firm when they're trying to do anything, say, for instance, on knowledge management or the processes of how we handle a particular litigation matter or transactional matter. And as a result, I think it creates these exact barriers to change that were just raised in terms of the ability to be able to effectively go after change is negatively influenced by tremendous barriers because you have to herd so many cats to get people on board, and you have a disincentive to do that, right? Because the more you push, the more you create the risk that someone will leave and take your revenues with them.
Good points, and herding cats is definitely an apt term for that. Jason, I'm going to ask you this next question. According to John Cotter, the author of the book Leading Change, there are 4 key management principles that come into play here. Establishing urgency is the first, then creating a guiding coalition. Third is vision and strategy. Fourth is empowering employees. How do you see these principles as relevant to the legal industry, Jason?
I think it's really interesting to think about in terms of the kind of high noon showdown we have here in terms of how are we going to use technology to improve productivity and make the legal services business more predictable and more budget friendly. And that is an urgent challenge facing people on both sides of the client equation. So on the law firm side, clients are increasingly asking for, and I think it's the last study I saw said it's up to 15% now, alternative fee agreements and flat fee matters. And And once you get away from that billable hour, all your incentives change, and you're really focused now on efficiency and productivity, and you're looking at technology, process improvement, knowledge management on how are you going to get there from A to B, from the current situation to a situation where you can maintain or even improve your profit margins in this new environment. From the client side, general counsels, and I think a lot of lawyers at law firms, really want to try and put themselves in the general counsel's shoes, and they're under increasing pressure from the chief financial officers to be able to take the outside counsel budget and say, hey, how are we going to make this more predictable? How are we going to make this more time-friendly in terms of when does a legal matter, can we project when it's going to be completed? Can we project our ultimate cost and outlay? And that's not just exposure and litigation. It's also, for an M&A matter, an outsourcing transaction, you name it, research, 50-state survey. You want to start thinking about that. And they're doing that internally, heavily, with their own internal legal spend on their in-house lawyers. And now they're really trying to project that out. So it's really a business opportunity for a law firm to say, we're going to be the leader in this area and take these clients by the hand and help them with this. Right now, though, it's just kind of this showdown because you have almost no law firms leading in this area and trying to do this for the reason we just talked about that were just raised, those barriers to change. So how do you get past those barriers? And you really need to think about the Cotter principle, first and foremost, of establishing urgency. So you have to really show, I think, upfront, immediately, a tremendous ROI, a tremendous return on investment. So if that's at the law firm, basically, we can go to this Fortune 100 corporate legal department, and they have publicly announced at a recent meeting they are dying to find a law firm that can give them budget predictability for, say, their outsourcing matters. And you know what? If we win this business, it's going to be a new seven-figure client. That's the kind of urgency at a law firm that you need, I think, to be able to do things. If you're on the client side, then it's similar in terms of we're going to be able to predict ahead of time effectively what our legal budget is going to be for the matters we know we're going to have. And I think that's the urgency you want to create. And oddly enough, that's not enough to get you there. You need even more than that to tie that organizational return on investment to the individual career success of a particular decision maker. So there's someone within the firm, who's powerful. You might have the managing partner saying, this is great, I want to go after this, I'm totally excited about that. But if she then has to go to the top technology law partner who handles, their outsourcing deals and get his sign-off, she's not going to get it if he doesn't see the ROI tied to his individual career success and that he's very excited and on board with it. You've got a huge financial splitting issue there in terms of how you're going to share the fruits of this engagement, and that's a big urgency issue. On the client side, you have the same kinds of concerns in terms of this might be a great thing. You might have the CEO excited about this. You might have the CFO excited about this. But ultimately, for the most part, those guys are going to defer to the general counsel. And if she's not on board with this, if she's not excited about it and doesn't think this is important, she'll be a blocker. She'll resist. And you need to figure out, what does this do for her career? How does this make her perceived as a leader in the industry? How does this give her the ability to expand her budget ultimately and give her more clout within the company and more power? These are the kinds of issues you need to tie the organizational ROI to the individual. Ultimately, then, you need that person whose individual career success is impacted. That needs to be the decision maker. Obviously, you want other people on board who are key subject matter experts to be able to drive your change forward. Might be a technology person as well as a lawyer. Might be a continuous improvement, like a Six Sigma or Lean expert. And, it might be a knowledge management expert. But you need those people as well. And you need the ROI to tie down to their individual success, too, so they're motivated. So you need that decision maker on board with your guiding coalition, and everybody in the coalition has to be individually buying into this because there's tremendous fruits to be gained for them. If you don't have that decision maker, no matter how much work you put in it, no matter how great your output is, you ultimately are looking at failing in the long run in terms of implementing change because you won't be able to replicate it. You won't scale up with the organization no matter how great or attractive it is. Ultimately, then, you want to really think hard about a stakeholder analysis for your vision and your strategy. So who are the people in the organization who are likely to support, not particularly care, or even actively block you in this coalition, this team, its effort to implement the change? One thing people often don't think about is everybody on the team likely to support? And if you have people on your team who don't care or active blockers, you probably have your hands tied right there from the start, and your chances of success go down. Very common to have those people on the team, so they need to be persuaded up front, and that's where the decision maker really exercises his or her clout. So ultimately, what you need to then think about in this persuasion process, whether it's on the team or outside of it, is getting people excited. How does the positive aspects of this change, even if there's not necessarily an ROI improvement for that individual, how do the positive aspects of the change make a positive improvement in the life of the people who don't support it up front? And ultimately, you're dealing with cognitive issues here. It's not a logical, persuasive, dollars and cents issue. You want to start thinking about persuading through values. I know that you in the IT department are a big fan of us adopting the latest cutting-edge technology. Maybe what we can do is look at the best tools out there to be able to facilitate this change. That would be a good example of persuading with values. You want to really think about that in motivating people, and ultimately, you got a testing issue. What you may think will motivate people might not get anywhere with them. So you'll probably often find that you need to start thinking about all kinds of different cognitive and values-based ways to excite the people who could be blockers or not care, and ultimately torpedo your change. Finally, the big thing that you can do wrong in a change is if you implement it in a way that takes away people's power, that makes it harder for them to do their job. People need to feel like they're not just accountable for implementing a change, but that they've got the managerial authority to implement it. And if they have to implement a change that makes life more difficult, and they don't have the authority to get rid of those difficulties, then basically what you're doing with your change is you're not improving the universe, you're increasing waste. And that's one of the worst things you can do with change. To kind of give you a great example, I had one client once, and they decided to have everybody in their department get certified on a new management method. And they gave them a very short period of time, and there weren't enough projects to work on. So people grabbed all kinds of ridiculous projects that didn't need this elaborate management method. And one of the things they picked was signing contracts. So they said, you know what, people aren't getting signed contracts straight to the central filing office. There's a very simple solution for that. You penalize them until they do. And boom, problem solved. Instead, what they did is they instituted an elaborate signing policy for contracts, getting multiple layers of authority across the organization in on it. And what did that do? What it did is it made the process of getting a contract signed after the client had agreed to it with whoever they were contracting with longer than the actual contract negotiations. So what it did is it created waste. And you always want to think about with the change you're implementing is, are we really getting the return on investment we're hoping for here? And is this return on investment from a broader universal standpoint actually creating more waste than the narrow thing that we're focused on? Is that helpful?
Well, that was very helpful. Thank you very much. I just want to see, Kenya, do you have any follow-up thoughts on that?
I think some of the points that Jason made about having individuals feel empowered to be a part of that decision is important. Part of my role involves going out to law firms and interviewing the attorneys and their staff around the jobs that they do, observing their environments and that sort of thing. And in a lot of cases, when we talk to either junior level attorneys or staff, a lot of individuals don't feel empowered around decisions that are made or tools that are in place. And so that sort of diminishes their interest in using them, or they're forced to use them. And so when they do have feedback around certain things, whether it be a process or those particular tools, they're more apprehensive about sharing it. And that sort of hinders the change or the progress of that firm.
Chris, how about you? Any follow-up on that?
I think Jason's point on establishing urgency is well taken, and we live in an interesting industry where these changes that we're talking about regarding technology, regarding management, regarding alternative billing arrangements have happened in every other industry except for the legal industry, and it seems like we do a very poor job of actually leading change, and the ROI is coming to be these days change or die, rather than change and see great benefits. The great benefit is you're going to be around tomorrow, and we're finally getting around to it. But so that sense of urgency is finally being created for us, I think. And it's interesting to hear Jason note that even so, it doesn't appear that law firms are scrambling to lead the change even yet, even though the general counsels and corporations that are paying their bills are starting to demand it. So it's interesting.
Yeah, I give the legal industry maybe more credit than a lot of people do. I mean, I think the bigger the firm, the more institutionalized they are, the slower they are to change. But I've seen a lot of innovation among smaller firms over the years in particular. And in some ways, I feel like the legal profession has been on the leading edge, in small chunks of it anyway, pockets of it, in advancing changes in technology and business structures and other such things. But, well, Chris, next question is for you, and we want to talk about what are some of the urgent issues facing law firms that are forcing change.
Not that I was trying to segue into that, but well, but indeed,
that's okay.
I think there are, particularly in the smaller law space where the vast majority of lawyers live, the numbers are difficult to come by, but between 400 and 600,000 lawyers in the United States work for either themselves or in 2 or 3 lawyer organizations, and not for larger law firms. And some of the demographics that are changing over the past several years are forcing a lot of change in that group of attorneys. Since 2008, almost 6,000 lawyers have been laid off from large law. And in 2009 alone, it was more than 4,600 lawyers were laid off. That's not including staff. Giant firms like Dewey LaBeouf are just gone, and then these lawyers are coming, and they still want to work as attorneys, and they are generating a lot of change and competition for the smaller law firms. And at the same exact time, there's a lot of competition from below. The newly minted attorneys, the class of 2007, 65.4% after 9 months had jobs that require a law degree. 35% did not. 85%, only 85% had any job at all. Either with what's being called the barely legal jobs, where you kind of need a law degree to do them. A document review, you're paying $35,000, $40,000, $50,000 a year. Counting in that 85%, but so 15% of law grads in 2011 after 9 months have no job whatsoever. I've been reading articles, working at Radio Shack, those all count towards the 85%, the rest don't. While all this is going on, you have companies like LegalZoom and Nolo Press delivering DIY services that used to be the bread and butter of a lot of small law firms. And finally, unbundling is being allowed in some states where lawyers are allowed to do, or lawyers or quasi-lawyers, in some states even paralegals, are allowed to do bits and pieces of what used to be considered legal work. Real estate closings, wills, living wills, and advanced directives and that kind of thing. And so all this different competition, and the lawyers working in the small and medium or small law firms and solos are in the squeeze between these effects. And then in addition, what you had mentioned earlier is client expectations have really begun to change. We live in an environment where the professionals we deal with, we expect to, we being consumers now, expect to have availability on a 24/7 basis. I remember growing up when we used to go on vacation, we'd have to go the day before to the bank to get some cash so we could have money on vacation, buy food. Not anymore. We expect to be able to check our balance in the car, on our phone, transfer money from one account to the other, and just do it as we roll. And we're expecting this now of our, we're able to book our physician's appointments online. We're able to do almost all of our professional interactions online. And this is the expectation we're having of our attorneys as well, that they be available 24/7, that we can get information from them when it's convenient for the consumer, that they do provide alternative billing, and that they accept electronic payments. And all these expectations are leaving those who will not change behind, and really developing this urgency that Jason was talking about behind the change. And then finally, the sources of revenue that lawyers used to depend on are all struggling. A lot of lawyers depend on real estate closings in residential real estate. That's not happening. We're down still in the 30% range of the number of real estate closings. The financial industry, which was a huge source of revenues, is basically looking for efficiencies that they weren't looking for before. And the general recession is really hitting lawyers hard. So I think all these issues are coming together to force change into law firms. Jason was talking about big law, but also in small law, where many of us live, are really being put in the squeeze, and the changes being demanded by these exigent circumstances.
Yeah, the expectation of clients that they'll get something now is really such a fundamental change from when I started practicing law. The idea that a client can call and you can say, well, let me think about it, I'll get back to you in a few days. Yeah. They don't understand that. That whole deliberative aspect of law practice has been lost, and I think that's somewhat of a tragedy. I think it's useful to mull over a problem and give it some time and think about it before you just shoot out an answer, but people don't understand that anymore.
And we measured, in my law firm, we were experimenting with ways of delivering, or getting back to prospective clients. And we measured the life expectancy of a criminal case from the first phone call that came in to be in the number of hours. Between 2 and 3 hours, and that person will have decided on an attorney because they'll be doing their research broadly through various methodologies, and they're just going to choose somebody. People expect they can log on to Avo and ask questions and get responses right back from attorneys free of charge.
Yep.
And these are a lot of the expectations that are driven.
Yep. Kenya, how about you? Do you have thoughts on this?
In some of the law firms that I've visited and in talking to people within various roles, I've seen a lot of what was mentioned, but it's interesting because people in a lot of cases acknowledge these things, but putting them into practice is the difficult part. So, going back to what we had talked about earlier, it's easy to list out all of the challenges and what needs to happen, but when you look at the accountability and taking people away from actually practicing to address these things, there's definitely a need for people to say, we have to carve this out. We have to define what it is that we're carving out. We have to execute.
Yeah, and that goes back to what you were talking about earlier, where you said you have to see success around you, right?
Yes.
Because it's not like nobody's doing this, right? The changes are happening. There are law firms making the very changes that we're talking about right now. Mm-hmm. You just have to be aware of them and see that success, and then have people around you that can say, you can do that too.
Right.
Yeah. Jason, anything to add on that?
The point you just made, Bob, has really struck with me about we've lost something with the timing. And for me, it kind of sets the context of where we should be going as legal services professionals going forward. And ultimately, what we need to think about with the timing and clients expecting things instantaneously, I think are two things. The first thing is we should start thinking about the things that we do that really are doable instantaneously. Whether that's an incredibly simple confidentiality agreement, or a particular document that's extremely easy to automatically create. We should start thinking about what are the things we do in our practice that are things that can be automated and things that we can use a mixture of knowledge management and a defined process and document assembly technology or other technology to be able to put something together extremely quickly. And that's frankly how we maintain our profit margins when we're doing something on a flat fee basis. And that's true whether you're talking about a equity partner at Skadden Arps in New York City, or you're talking about a solo lawyer in rural California with a trust and estates practice doing a will on a flat fee basis. We need to think about how can we be hyper efficient using these tools to be able to deal with these quick timing demands. But on the other hand, and I don't know if I want to use the word push back, but I think where we really demonstrate what's unique and where our value is and where we can frankly charge for it as lawyers is the tacit knowledge that I think we do on an almost subconscious level as attorneys, especially experienced attorneys. When I hire a particularly talented, experienced lawyer to help me in a particular area, which I did when I was in-house counsel at a Fortune 500 company. One of the things I'm looking for is somebody who understands a lot of negotiating issues, and that's not something that's obvious. It's not something that's super easy to automate. Figuring out what are the wants for us in a situation, and predicting what those wants are for the counterpart, our adversary, figuring out what are the needs we have, and figuring out what are the needs they have that we can live with, predicting ahead of time walk points and things that just won't ever be agreed on for both sides, and figuring out our BATNAs, our best alternatives to a negotiated agreement, is extremely important, because then we know whether we can bluff or not, and what we can say we'll follow through on in a negotiation on obstacles and choke points. That's a really valuable skill that experienced attorneys have that they can charge for, that takes time, that you want people to mull over, and you don't want to be done, overnight automated. And that's, I think, the second area in terms of the timing issue. We need to think long and hard about how much of our day and how much of what we're delivering in terms of building value for our clients is the stuff that's really simple and frankly we should just automate, and how much of it is that tacit knowledge that's tremendously skill-based and valuable. You still want to think about what you can automate there, but a lot of that, it really just requires deep thought. And I think that's the thing that we really want to be charging the bulk of our time for clients, because that's where we're giving them a lot of great unique value that helps them.
So it's understanding where our value lies and what parts of our practice we can commoditize.
Exactly, and it doesn't lie in taking, a 6-month-old Microsoft Word agreement and changing the names.
No. But don't tell our clients that.
I wanted to add to that. I think Jason's spot on. From a human factors standpoint, part of my role is to come into any situation and to look at what tasks can be automated versus where do you leave the higher level thought, the decision making, and that sort of thing to the human being within the environment. And in a lot of cases, in my experiences, it's been difficult where I've had to bite my tongue, where I've had suggestions to the staff or an attorney around how to do something a little more effectively so that they're spending their time on the things that they bring value to versus, having to do repetitive tasks and that sort of thing. So that point really resonates with me.
And so
what's really interesting about what you just said, Kenya, is I think it underscores how attorneys, we tend to fall along a gradient. And at one end of it is, one pole you have artistry, and I think the other pole you have, systematic logic, if you will. And I think attorneys tend to group more at the artistry pole. And there are many, many attorneys, even today, who will tell you that the practice of law is not reducible. The practice of law is not a science. The practice of law is an art. And I can't tell you exactly what I do. I can't make it automated and systematized. If I do, I drive out the value I give for you. And I think that mentality is still very popular in the legal world. I think Bob's right. You do have some innovators. You have Riverview Law in the United Kingdom now, which is doing a fascinating mix of things for individuals like divorce and legal matters for big corporations, like complex transactional. And they're doing everything on a flat fee basis, and they're the first firm I've heard of doing this. So you've got some innovators out there, and those are the people who really see law more as a science. But I think ultimately that's the ultimate change management question for the practice of law, is how do you get people to think about what areas of law we can automate to make it better, faster, and cheaper, and to have consistently great results, and move away from that I'm an artisan, I'm an artist mentality, and everything is unique and special, and nothing is everything is new. And I think you want to move people more towards a mentality of there's very little we do as lawyers that's new under the sun. Most everything we do, someone else has done, and probably thousands of other people have done, which means probably one of them has done it better than you. How can we tap into it and learn from it? And I think that's one of the things we need to think about with legal technology.
Well, that's a good point, and that perhaps leads us into the next question, discussion point. And Kenny, I'm going to address this to you, but according to the book Switch, How to Change Things When Change is Hard, authors Chip and Dan Heath argue that in part, what makes change so hard is ourselves, or at least our own brains, that we aren't necessarily within ourselves of one mind. We each have our sort of rational side and our emotional side, and they are sometimes doing battle with each other. Do you agree with that statement, and can you give us an illustration of that?
Definitely. When we go back and look at the definition of self-efficacy, your beliefs on how you'll succeed within a certain situation determine how you think, how you feel, and how you behave. So I always think of the little angel and devil sitting on your shoulder. Yeah. The angel is the rational side of you, the voice of reason, and the little devil is your emotional side. So what makes me feel good? What do I want to do right now? But ultimately, how you behave or what decisions you ultimately make, that's what determines your success. So in looking at this struggle that you may have, and we've moved to the next slide, when you have this struggle between these two sides of yourself, your behaviors and what you can actually do to be proactive around something is what will determine your success. And Jonathan Haidt mentioned in his book, The Happiness Hypothesis, he characterized the rational and the emotional as the elephant and the rider. So obviously, we look at the rider as the rational part that drives or controls the emotional. But ultimately, the elephant is 6 tons and the rider is presumably no more than 200, 250 pounds. So who's going to win in that argument? The elephant, obviously. So in a lot of cases, we go with what feels right or what's comfortable, even though we know it may not be right. So that's a part of change that makes things difficult. And so when we look at trying to bring our emotions and our rational thoughts together or in sync, that helps to increase our self-efficacy or our thoughts around a situation and our ability to change. So looking at a situation and its challenges as something that can be tackled or mastered. Looking at the level of commitment that you have in these activities and saying, okay, even though it doesn't feel good all the time, I'm still going to do it. I'm still going to try to achieve it. And not beating yourself up too much about setbacks or challenges that you face can help and making it easier to get things to change. But unfortunately, when we look at when these two disagree, obviously we're going to continue to avoid challenging tasks or look at those things that don't work well as areas of defeat. We lose self-confidence in our abilities, or we look at ourselves and say, you know what, I've never done this before, I can't do it, instead of just looking at it and saying, you know what, I'm going to make this change and try to align my thoughts, my emotions, and my behaviors.
All right, Chris, any thoughts on that?
It's funny because when Kenny started talking about the devil on the shoulder, you start thinking, or I started to think about, trying to do the things that feel good, that give me immediate reward rather than the rational thing. But really, as attorneys, and the difficulty in finding change, a lot of what's actually going on is the fear, right? Yes. Don't do that. That is frightening. That is unknown. That's not in my comfort zone, and that's as or more powerful than the quick satisfaction. And I find in working with attorneys as I have over the past several years, that getting them to reach out and do, even to focus on the more high-value tasks and outsource, or get others to do the more administrative tasks, pulls a lot of people out of their comfort zone that they've been in for a long time and really limits their success. And even though they're their rational mind, they know that's exactly what they need to be doing. I think it's also one of the biggest challenges with smaller law firms is effective marketing. Getting out there and doing, not yellow pages, not advertising, but getting out there, meeting people, getting people to know what you do, and leading marketing through interpersonal reactions is not something a lot of lawyers do a great job of. And again, I think it's that you should. Right. But the devil on the shoulder, so that certainly rings true.
Yeah. And Jason, how about you? Do you have any thoughts on that before we move on to the next question?
Yeah, it makes me think a lot about the recent experiment done where they put people in an MRI machine and looked at their brain, and they would ask people a question, and before the person could answer the question, something would fire in their brain, in their subconscious structures of their brain, and they would be able to correlate that with the answer before the person would form formulate the answer. About 7 seconds before you would answer the question, they would know what you were going to answer ahead of time, which is a bit mind-boggling at first. When I read that, I thought, oh my God, it sounds like something out of the movie Minority Report and the precognitives predicting the future and who's going to commit crimes or not. But then I thought about it and I said, you know what, that actually makes a lot of sense, because when we think about how we deal with things in our day, we tend to do a lot of our day on autopilot. We tend to not be deep thinking, logical philosophers for most of the decisions that we make. Most of the times we have a gut instinct as to how we feel and we just go with it. Might be, what you're going to have for dinner. Might be the ride you take home. It might be, what you're going to watch on TV. All of these things are not deep philosophical type thoughts. And it's very hard, I think, to militate between those and a deep logical argument and discussion that will ultimately lead you to the outcome of how you feel about something. And I think we, as human beings, kind of go back and forth between those. As lawyers, we're the greatest example ever of that, because what we're paid to do is to be deep logical philosophers. But it's hard to do that all the time, and it's very hard to do that with how we actually practice and manage ourselves. So it's very interesting, I think, from that standpoint.
Yeah, as I was listening to Kenya discuss the elephant in the rider, I was kind of wondering whether this whole analogy of the rational versus the emotional extends to organizations, and that might lead into our next question here, because Chris, the next question I want to ask you was really whether law firm structure impacts the way decisions are made, and I don't know, are there rational and emotional sides in law firm structure, or does it extend beyond that?
Well, I know there's emotional sides. Sometimes I wonder about the latter. But certainly it plays a huge part. And size is so important. I mean, Jason, you were talking about, was it Riverview in the UK?
Yes.
Yeah. So I mentioned it's a large firm.
Decent size, yes.
Yeah, and so I was thinking about flat fee when I started practice. When I was a prosecutor, I finally went into private practice in the early 2000s, and decided that I was going to lead the way in flat fee family law in my small town. That's where I was going to make my mark, and I quickly learned, as existing in a very small firm, that was not such a great idea, at least in the beginning, because without the scale of a large organization that understands the costs and the effect on your clients that a flat fee billing arrangement might have, I quickly learned that when you charge a flat amount, no matter what it is, your clients might eat you alive, because all of a sudden phone calls are free and your time is free. They paid their money, and your time is now free. And so being able to have that scale and understand what the actual costs are help to feed the rational decision making. Whereas mine, I went into that as a total emotional. I'm going to change the world and do this. I think also the size matters in the sense that small firms, the smallest of firms, operate as independent silos, and it's really hard to get that scale and to get that rationalization of the information from which you can derive those kinds of decisions. I think a good way to do that is to do what Kenya said, is to get those external influences, partner up with people, understand what other people are doing, share information, which I think we also do a terrible job of. I mean, nobody sits at or at least in my small bar, nobody would sit at the bar meeting and go, so what do you charge? And talk about their clients and whether they were profitable in that family law case versus this family law case and what led to the profitability or not. And I think for a large extent, actually, we don't do the math and find out if we're profitable enough. So in the smaller firms, there's not a lot of that rigor around profit, loss, cost benefit analysis, etc. Also, the decision-making process in a small firm tends to be mostly emotional. Small firms operate by consensus, that try to build consensus and move forward, and that's often done through more of an emotional appeal than a rational one. Whereas in a larger firm, you have a more political, for lack of a better word, structure, where there's typically a strong stronger managing partners, stronger committee structure, and consensus is built more by selling ideas and information rather than emotion. Though it can also be difficult because there are more varying interest groups. So the size, I think, can have a real effect on rational decision making. Another thing that I've seen, though, is on emotional decision making. In medium-sized firms, I've seen that decision making can be very, very emotional. I went into a firm where the senior level partnership had the best technology, really the best toys of the whole firm. Didn't use them. It was the decision to get that technology, get those toys, had nothing to do with the efficiencies that they would gain. It's just that they wanted to have the newest stuff because they were the senior management of the firm, and so those decisions were being made on prestige, where on the one level these senior partners were too important to play with the toys, but they wanted to have the best toys, and we're in a larger firm, those decisions would probably be made by a technology committee or whatever, and the decisions will be, again, more rational, less emotional. So I think that size, I'll just say that size can certainly play a difference, or make a difference. One of the other factors, though, is to get away from size and to talk about law firm structure, is that law firms, while they can be defined by size, can also really be seen as existing in one of three categories that can be related to size but aren't really completely aligned with size. And that is whether they're progressive, traditional, or low tech. Progressive law firms are actively seeking technologies and methodologies that increase their profitability, that increase the amount of service they can deliver to their clients for the amount of work invested, and really are on the leading edge of doing that. Traditional law firms are willing to accept technology and will spend some money on technology and improving methodologies, but are not on the leading edge, so they're probably the later adopters. And then you have your low-tech firms who buy only what is absolutely necessary in technology. They're still heavily invested in the fax machines, but not really too much on using online client portals and that kind of thing. And looking at firms from that perspective, which again I think is emotional, how we see ourselves. So do we see ourselves as leaders, or do we see ourselves as practicing the way that our forefathers practiced? Can also have a great impact on the way decisions are made.
Are the firms that you identify as progressive, does that mean they're sort of naturally good at change management, or does one necessarily go with the other?
I don't think so. I think that they're more willing to try and fail, and I think that reiterating the attempts and failures at and accepting failure as part of the change management leads you to get better at it. So you may not. I think as a progressive firm, you might not start out as terribly good at it, but you get better at it because they don't teach you this stuff. I mean, that's the one thing. Nothing about what kind of firm culture or how you're going to manage change or what technologies you're going to adopt. These are not courses that are well taught, at least when I was in law school. And I think law schools are starting to adopt some of this today, but really we do a very poor job today to indoctrinate our law students with any of these notions. So I think the progressive firms are people who emotionally see themselves as progressive and then learn to get better at change management.
Jason, on this question of law firm structure, do you have any thoughts on that? How it impacts how decisions are made?
It's funny because I spent most of my career at large law firms, and I think of them as highly emotional places. And generally, what I find is a relatively small group of equity partners who are terrific at marketing and bringing in clients and the bulk of the revenues for the firm. However they emotionally feel about something is what happens. And you might have an IT department that recommends one thing, but they may just completely nix it because of how they emotionally feel. So not to disagree with Chris at all, because he's looked into this much more than I have, but what that may just say is that not only are big law firms pretty darn emotional, but that just underscores how emotional even smaller ones are. So it's very interesting to me. Let's take a great example. Just about every decent-sized law firm has what's called a document management system. And those applications are pretty robust, and they offer a lot of interesting abilities. I would say 99% of the lawyers I've ever worked with don't use the document management system hardly at all. They use it for basically a unique document number and full text search. A few might use it for versions. That's about it. And, it just makes you wonder emotionally why we can't engage with these kinds of things. And ultimately, what I think more and more, when I see solos or small firm attorneys doing things that large law firms do, and Bob, you pointed this out at the beginning of the call, is there's some real innovators among tiny law firms or solos. I know a lawyer who's a solo, and he's probably the top expert in the country on Fortune 100 legal breaches and how do you respond to the associated privacy law requirements when you have a technology breach. That's a pretty high-end ability, and he's a solo. And it makes me wonder, across all levels of legal practice, ultimately, are we going to become focused on gamification? And Silicon Valley and venture capital firms out there are really starting to invest in gamification-type applications. And it's really the idea of what can we do in terms of taking the principles of gaming, the fact that when you play a game, it's a balance between having setbacks and frustrations, but also having successes and enjoyment. And how can you use those principles to get people as hyper-motivated on the work they do every day as they are in playing a game? And there's a great book on this called A Theory of Fun. And the writer of A Theory of Fun, you can get it off Amazon, he says games will move forward as a medium when instead of just creating a game that lets you blow things up, you create a game that says, if we implement cap and trade, what will that do to the price of oil? And when I read that, I thought about if someone introduces a limitation of liability clause that excludes liability for all consequential damages, what will that do to my client's litigation exposure in a particular transaction? If you can gamify cap and trade, you can gamify limitation of liability. And I think that's a very interesting thing to think about in terms of all these issues we're talking about with motivating change. If you can get people hyper-focused on the development of mastery and a new change and new idea, maybe gamification is what's going to level the field of practice and make us all the same, from the tiny solos all the way to big law firms. And we're going to start thinking, wow, if I'm going to go after these kinds of things, technology can support the gamification, and there are technology tools I might grab in order to achieve my game goals.
Great. I just want to, we've got about 10 minutes left in this broadcast. Have we had any questions?
There's a few.
You want to throw one at us? We do have a couple of questions here, and we do have some more topics we want to cover, but I want to see if we have any questions here.
So how do you see us providing quality with the required speed when you just said that the time frames within hours now?
How do lawyers provide quality and match the demand for speed within the time frames that they have to operate? Chris, thoughts on that? That's a nice, easy question.
Yeah, sure. Well, I think it goes back to the question of where do the things that we know and the things that we can produce fit into the category of commoditized versus specialized and artistic, right? I'm not going to design the perfect merger for your two companies in a matter of speed. That's not what you're going to pay me for there. But I might be able to get you a non-disclosure agreement with some speed. Now, that agreement might still have some particular value that is mine, that I've developed it with the years of experience I have working in that field, and has some particular nuances that I've created, but I can still generate it with speed and deliver high value with that speed. Now, the real question is, will you then pay for it? If I can deliver it in 10 minutes, are you going to pay me, what a representation of the value that I've provided rather than a representation of the time it took me to do it? And I think we're still overcoming that barrier. I think because if you can deliver in that time frame, the question really quickly comes. And we don't have that problem with anything else. If I go down to Volkswagen dealership and get a car that I can buy in 20 minutes, I don't say, well, you gave me a car in 20 minutes and I should only pay $80 for it. It's the value given, and we're still, I think, working on in these alternative billing arrangements on making sure that the value is understood.
Yeah, and I think we have to be willing to say, this is hard. I have to think about it a little bit. It's going to take me a little bit of time. I can't get back to you in 10 minutes or even 24 hours on this one. It's okay to say that, I think. think? I don't know. You're the psychologist on the table. What do you think?
I think Chris was spot on in that if you can templatize something or come up with a process to do something that will get you the information that you need, and then you're able to say, okay, from here, what are my next steps? And is it something I can address quickly? Or, to your point, do I have to go back and say to my potential client, there is a need for me to go back and do more effort around this and that sort of thing? Being able to use those templates will get you to that point quicker, but also if there's something that you can give them in the short term, you can deliver because of that.
Yeah. How about you, Jason? Any further thoughts on that question?
It's really interesting, I think, from kind of Kenya's perspective, the psychological dimension. I think a lot about a cognitive fallacy called the asymmetric insight fallacy. That's basically the idea of the self and the other. You tend to think any thing going on with you or any person who you identify as just like you, you always think the best of. And you always look hard at the obstacles and things that they have to deal with and respect those. Anybody who you see has kind of an alien other out there, and anybody associated with them, you tend to cheapen the obstacles and problems and things that they have to deal with. And that fallacy, that cognitive mistake, goes on all the time in the client and attorney relationship. To some degree, it's used, at the big law firm end in order to justify the very high prices that are paid. Because basically, when I started out at a major law firm, I was told our business model is our clients say jump and we say how high, and we charge a very pretty penny for that. And ultimately, that's based on the fact that the client doesn't really have a lot of respect for what the time demand does to the lawyer. And that has a couple of negative things, engaging that fallacy as a client. One negative thing is, as you guys have said, it compromises the quality of the work. Sometimes things just take more time. And it can really compromise the quality of the work if you make somebody work through the night and you compromise their sleep. Someone who's sleep compromised is the same as somebody who's been drinking alcohol. It doesn't make sense to make your lawyer, who's a deep thinker, to act like someone who's been drinking alcohol. And then the second thing is I think it hurts the quality of life in our profession, and I think that's one of the biggest complaints for lawyers, is the quality of life for a lot of lawyers is not very good. And I think we need to figure out ways to get away from that asymmetric insight fallacy, and it goes on. We do the same thing. As lawyers, we do the same thing to other people we interact with. We do it a lot to technology providers. So we need to start thinking about how we can be very structured and get away, I think, from what Kenya would say would be the elephant.
Yeah. Okay, and I'm just going to point out, we've just put up a slide up of 5 steps to implement change. Experts tend to agree on these. Include all stakeholders, look at what's working and what isn't, develop an action plan with deliverable dates and assign owners, start with a change that can be backed by reliable data, and communicate the plan and make it happen. We can talk about that a little bit. I just want to see, was there one more quick question here?
Yeah.
Or even a not quick question.
What do you think is the most valuable technology available to law firms that's not widely discussed?
Good question. What is the most valuable technology to law firms that's not widely discussed? Anybody want to pick up on that?
Gosh, I have another hour, right? I think there's so many.
You're not going to say practice management? Come on.
I think practice management is such a broad answer. I think time capture. I think if I was going to jump on one small thing, having practice management tools around you so that you keep a much better track of your time and understand the cost that goes into the services that you deliver is not discussed enough regarding how attorneys could do a much better job of doing that. Case and matter management technologies are on the vanguard of doing that because they assemble all the information that you need to do that effectively. Yeah. But I think that one tool alone can save lawyers a lot of time and energy, and also enable them to deliver better quality to their clients in a shorter amount of time.
Yeah, I think Jason alluded to this idea. We have all these great technologies available to us that we don't know how to use, or that we underuse, or that we basically just ignore. Yeah. Document management, practice management, time and billing systems, that a surprisingly large number of lawyers are not using these technologies. Or even something as generic as the internet. People are not using it well, not knowing how to use it best. I know our time is getting short. Jason, you have a quick thought on that?
Yeah, I'd say document assembly technology. I think think we need to get out of just being in a word processor all the time. I actually went to see a trust and estates attorney a couple years ago, and he went and sent me this elaborate, complex, long Microsoft Word document with all these different tables and questions, and I just didn't even want to deal with it, and I trashed it, and I never moved forward with him. And I think what we need to start thinking about is there's technologies out there now that, you could have your client do your first draft of all your documents for you, and then you can polish it, which would give you a tremendous boost on time and make you much more profitable in terms of your profit margins. And you can publish a questionnaire now to a client. You can publish that. You can reuse your work and make it valuable. You can publish a questionnaire of a document that you've created on your website and put a search engine optimized keyword against it and use it for marketing. I think document assembly really is something that lets you manage your knowledge management, manage your processes, and make your profit margins much, much better. So it's interesting, really interesting, I think, technology to go after.
All right. Kenya, you might be getting the last word here.
I think that when you look at the way that medicine has evolved and how they're utilizing tools more effectively within medicine, so now your doctor comes into the office with a small computer and they have portals on their website where you can either view your medical information, make payments, schedule appointments. Looking at the way things are done within the medical field and how things are evolving, they are not obviously as efficient as they could be, but some of that activity is transferable. So looking at the way that they do things and use tools is something that a lot of firms can consider.
Excellent. I think we are just about out of time on this. Do we have a few more minutes, producer?
I'm at 2 o'clock.
Yeah, okay. I think we're at the end of the time. We really appreciate all of your joining us for this broadcast. As I say, if you can shoot some further emails in, we'll try and get to answer any questions we weren't able to answer. And thanks a lot to all the panelists for taking the time to be with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.